Chapter 33. His Enemy Strikes. Fear is a sensation I thought I had mastered. I've faced down billionaire predators, federal indictments, and the literal barrel of a gun in a Brooklyn warehouse. But as I stood in the sterile, high-security visiting wing of the Zurich Detention Center, my hands were cold. It wasn't the police or the bars that chilled me. It was the woman sitting on the other side of the reinforced glass. Eleanor Blackwood didn't look like a prisoner. She wore a tailored charcoal wool coat, likely smuggled in by her lawyers, and her silver hair was pinned back with a precision that mocked her surroundings. She was reading a file, a pair of designer spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She simply closed the folder and looked at me with the detached interest of a biologist observing a specimen that had failed to thrive. "You look tired, Alexander," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the intercom. "Resignation doesn't seem to suit you. It makes you look common." "I didn't come here for a fashion critique, Mother," I said, my voice a low, lethal vibration. "You requested this meeting. You mentioned a fourth factor. If this is another one of your psychological plays to destabilize the Sterling Trust, save your breath. Eris Thorne is finished. The board is mine, and the company belongs to Maya." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You think you've won because you've cleared the sterling name of a 30-year-old theft. You're playing checkers while I'm moving the entire board. Eris Thorne was a pawn, a useful, bitter little man I used to keep Arthur Sterling in line. But the fourth factor isn't about theft, it's about survival." "What are you talking about?" "The neural mapping algorithm," she whispered. "Arthur Sterling was a genius, yes, but his science had a terminal flaw. A recursive feedback loop that causes neural degradation in the host after 48 hours of sustained mapping. He called it the fourth factor, the missing link that he couldn't solve before his stroke." I felt a cold lurch in my gut. Maya solved the mapping. She stabilized the recursive loop weeks ago. She stabilized the math, Alexander. She hasn't tested the biological reality. Eleanor tapped the glass with a manicured fingernail. "The only person who ever solved the fourth factor was your father, and he didn't put it in the journals. He locked it in a private server that requires a Blackwood biometric signature to open, a signature that only I and you possess." She leaned back, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "The Horizon Project is a ticking time bomb. In 48 hours, the first clinical trial patients in Zurich will begin the mapping phase. If they don't have the factor key, they won't just fail to recover. They will suffer irreversible brain damage, and Maya Sterling, the new Titan, will be the one who signed their death warrants." I stood up so abruptly the chair screeched against the floor. "You're lying." "Damn I." Eleanor's smile widened. "Check the logs from your father's 1995 research. Look for the Icarus files. Then tell me if you're willing to bet the lives of those patients and Maya's soul on my dishonesty." I turned and walked out before she could see the terror in my eyes. The enemy hadn't just struck. She had placed the blade in my hand and told me to choose between my mother's empire and my wife's legacy. Maya POV. The Herslinden Clinic was alive with a nervous, electric energy. Tomorrow was the first day of the human clinical trials. 5 patients, all suffering from late-stage neurodegenerative conditions, were being prepared for the first full-scale neural map. It was the culmination of my father's life. It was the reason I had survived the Blackwood takeover. I was in the lab reviewing the calibration data for the 10th time. Beside me, my father sat in a wheelchair, his eyes fixed on the holographic brain model. He couldn't speak much yet, but his presence was a blessing I still couldn't quite believe. "The pathways are clear, Dad," I whispered, pointing to the shimmering blue lines on the screen. "The recursive loop is holding at 0, 1 variance. It's perfect." My father looked at the screen, then at me. He frowned, his hand reaching out to tap a specific node in the prefrontal cortex, the area where the algorithms synthesize the data. "Factor," he rasped, his voice a dry, struggling sound. "What was that, Dad? The feedback factor?" He shook his head, his expression becoming frantic. Factor 4. A chill ran down my spine. Factor 4, is that a technical term? I've reviewed all your notes, Dad. There was nothing about a 4th factor. The lab door hissed open. Alexander walked in, but he didn't look like the man who had kissed me on the balcony last night. He looked like he had been hollowed out. His skin was pale, his eyes dark with a haunting, turbulent fear. "Maya," he said, his voice sounding like it was coming from far away. "We need to stop the trials." I froze. "What? Alexander, we're less than 24 hours away. The patients are prepped. The world is watching." "My mother?" He started, then stopped, his gaze flicking to my father. He walked over and knelt beside me, taking my hands. "Maya, she told me about a flaw, something called the 4th factor. She claims it causes neural degradation during sustained mapping." I felt the air leave my lungs. My father, he just said those words just now. Alexander looked at my father, his face twisting with a sudden, agonizing realization. "Then it's true. Arthur Blackwood found the solution and hid it. He wanted to ensure the Sterlings could never launch without a Blackwood holding the key." "I can find it," I said, my voice rising with a desperate edge. "I'll run a deep scan of the recursive logic. I'll find the flaw and I'll bridge it." "You don't have time," Alexander said, his grip on my hands tightening. "The trials start at 8 tomorrow morning. My mother says the key is in my father's Icarus files. Files that are locked behind a biometric vault in New York. A vault only she can authorize access to." I stood up, pulling my hands away. "Then she's holding the science hostage. Again." "She's holding you hostage, Maya. She told the Swiss authorities she'll turn over the decryption keys only if the board drops the charges against her and reinstates her as interim chair." The room went silent. The fallout had finally reached the point of no return. "She wants the company back," I whispered. "She wants the room." "She wants the room," Alexander agreed, his voice a hollow rasp. "And she's willing to let those 5 patients die to get it." Alexander POV. I watched Maya's world crumble for the second time in a month. She walked back to the console, her fingers flying across the keys with a frantic, hopeless energy. She was trying to find the flaw. She was trying to be the genius who didn't need a Blackwood to save her. But as I watched the Icarus simulation run on the screen, I saw the red lines begin to appear, neural degradation. The algorithm was eating the host's consciousness to fuel the map. It was a vampire, a perfect, beautiful, lethal vampire. "I can't fix it," Maya whispered, her hands dropping to her sides. "The math is too deep. It's embedded in the core architecture. My father. He must have known. That's why he never launched." I walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her back against my chest. She was shaking, not with fear, but with a raw, agonizing grief. "We're not letting them die, Maya," I said, my voice turning into the iron-hard tone I had used to build my empire. "And we're not giving her the company." "How if we don't have the keys?" I'm going back to the detention center, I said. I'm going to get those keys, not with a negotiation, not with a contract. Alexander, what are you going to do? I'm going to show her what happens when a Blackwood stops being a steward and starts being a son. I kissed her forehead and turned to the door. Alexander. She shouted. I stopped. Don't become her, she pleaded. Don't lose the man you found in the rain just to save the science. The science is your father's soul, Maya, and you are mine. I'll do whatever it takes to keep both alive. Maya POV. The next 6 hours were a descent into a nightmare. I stayed in the lab trying to find a workaround. I called every neuroscientist I knew. I called Leo Mercer. He didn't answer. I realized then that Leo likely knew about the fourth factor. That was why he had stayed so close. He was waiting for the crash so he could save the project with the Blackwood keys. The enemy wasn't just my mother-in-law. It was the entire foundation of my life. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The Icarus files are open, Maya. Check your private server. I lunged for the terminal. I opened the server. A stream of data, 30 years old, began to flood the screen. It was my father's handwriting, digitized and annotated by Arthur Blackwood. And there it was, the Factor 4 solution. A simple, elegant bridge that redirected the neural feedback into a dormant section of the cerebellum. It was beautiful. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. But as I integrated the code into the Horizon project, I saw a secondary file attached to the data. Settlement Agreement, Blackwood versus Sterling Trust. I opened it. My heart stopped. It was a legal document signed by Alexander Blackwood and Alina Blackwood. In exchange for the Icarus keys, Alexander had agreed to a life-term clause. He had signed over his freedom to his mother. He had agreed to return to New York, resume the role of CEO under her supervision, and, the most painful part, he had agreed to a formal, public annulment of our marriage. The price of the science was our life together. I felt a sob break through my chest. He had done it. He had sacrificed himself to save my father's legacy. He had gone back into the cage so I could stand in the light. No, I whispered, the tears blinding me. Alexander, no. Alexander POV. The plane ride back to New York was a funeral. I sat in the captain's chair, staring at the document my mother's lawyers had prepared, the life-term clause. It was the ultimate locked-in contract. I was no longer a man, I was a brand, I was a puppet. I was exactly what my mother had always wanted me to be. I looked at the ring I had taken off my finger. I had left it on the table in the Zurich hotel suite, along with a note I knew would break her heart. The room needs a steward, Maya. And the science needs a savior. You be the scientist, I'll be the stone. I felt a surge of self-loathing so intense I wanted to scream. I had spent weeks trying to prove I wasn't my father. But in the end, I had made the same deal he did. I had traded love for control. I had used the Blackwood way to solve a Sterling problem. My phone buzzed, a video link from the Zurich clinic. I didn't want to answer it. I didn't want to see her face, but I couldn't stop myself. The screen flared to life. Maya was standing in the lab. She looked wrecked, her eyes red, her hair a mess, but there was a fire in her gaze that I hadn't seen before. I saw the settlement, Alexander, she said, her voice a low, vibrating growl. It was the only way, Maya, the patience. To hell with the patience. She shouted, Do you think I want a legacy built on your soul? Do you think my father would want his science used as a leash for the man I love? It's done, Maya. The documents are filed. They're not done until the board ratifies them, she said, leaning closer to the camera. And I'm the majority shareholder now, remember. I own the room. And I'm telling you right now, Alexander Blackwood, I am not accepting your resignation. And I am certainly not accepting an annulment. Maya, you don't understand the legal weight of my mother's. I understand that she's a criminal. Maya interrupted. And I understand that she used a biometric vault to hide a public health solution. That's called medical racketeering, Alexander. And I've already sent the Icarus files to the International Court of Justice. I felt a spark of hope, tiny, fragile, but real. You what? She can't own the keys to a cure, Alexander. Not anymore. The moment she opened that vault for you, she made the data public record under the Zurich ethics mandate. She has no leverage. The settlement is void because it was signed under criminal duress. Maya smiled, a slow, beautiful, lethal smile. Turn the plane around, Alexander. Come home. The enemy didn't strike you. She just gave me the last piece of evidence I needed to bury her for good. Maya POV. The fallout was finally turning into a victory. I watched the screen as Alexander's expression shifted from despair to a dawning, incredulous joy. He looked at the pilot, then back at me. I'm coming home, he whispered. I know you are. I hung up the phone and turned to my father. He was watching me, a look of pure, unadulterated pride on his face. You did it, he rasped. We did it, Dad. I walked out of the lab and toward the patient recovery wing. The sun was rising over Zurich, a brilliant, cold gold. The clinical trials would start in 2 hours. The fourth factor was solved. The Blackwood name was being dismantled. But as I reached the elevator, I saw a man standing in the hallway. He was wearing a black suit, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He wasn't one of my security guards, and he wasn't one of Alexander's. Miss Sterling. The man asked, "Who are you?" I'm a representative of Vane Global, or what's left of it. Julian Vane has a message for you, personally. He handed me a small, black envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single, charred photograph. It was a picture of the Brooklyn warehouse, taken moments after the explosion. And on the back, in a handwriting that was jagged and filled with hate, were 4 words. The fire never dies. The enemy hadn't just been my mother. Julian Vane wasn't bankrupt. He was hiding. And he had just told me exactly where he was going to strike next. Alexander POV on the jet. The plane was banking, turning back towards Zurich. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a need to get back to Maya that was more powerful than anything I'd ever felt. We had won. The legal war was over. My mother was finished. But as I looked out the window at the Atlantic, I felt a sudden, sharp pang of dread. It was the steward instinct, the one that told me when a deal was too good to be true. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "Sir, you're heading back." "Yes, Marcus, I want a full sweep of the Herslinden Clinic. Now, I don't care about the press or the police. I want every person on that floor vetted again, and I want the security logs for the last hour." "Sir, what's wrong?" "Vane," I said, the name feeling like poison in my mouth. "He didn't just liquidate his assets, Marcus. He liquidated his soul. He's not looking for money anymore. He's looking for blood." "Sir, I'm seeing an anomaly in the clinic's power grid. A fluctuation in the neural mapping wing." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Maya, get her out of there, Marcus, now." The line went dead. I looked at the pilot. "Faster," I growled. "I don't care if the engines melt. Get me to Zurich." Maya POV. The lights in the hallway flickered, then went out. The emergency generators kicked in, bathing the clinic in a sickly red glow. The humming of the machines changed pitch, becoming a low, vibrating growl that seemed to rattle my bones. I looked at the man in the black suit. He was smiling. "Julian says hello," the man whispered. He reached into his jacket, but I didn't wait to see what he was pulling out. I lunged for the emergency alarm, but before my hand could touch the button, the floor beneath me erupted. The fire of Act II wasn't out. It had just been waiting for the right moment to consume us. As the world turned into a blur of smoke and shattering glass, I heard a voice in my ear, a voice that haunted my nightmares. "Did you really think I'd let a Blackwood have the last word, Maya?" Caleb Thorne, he hadn't been in prison. He had been the special consultant Vane had been hiding, and he was standing over me, a remote detonator in his hand. "Act III is fallout, Maya," Caleb whispered, leaning down, "and you're about to see just how far down the rabbit hole goes." Alexander POV, 20 minutes later. The jet landed in a storm of sirens and flashing lights. I didn't wait for the stairs. I jumped from the door, my boots hitting the wet tarmac. I ran toward the clinic, my heart a hammer of pure, unadulterated terror. The Herslinden Clinic was on fire. The top 2 floors, the neural recovery wing, were a skeleton of twisted steel and orange flames. Debris was raining down on the hill, the snow turning to black slush. "Maya!" I screamed, the sound lost in the roar of the fire. I pushed past the police, past the firemen, past the screaming nurses. I reached the entrance, but a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Sir, it's too dangerous. The structure is failing." I turned, ready to kill whoever was holding me. It was Marcus. He was covered in soot, his eyes wide with horror. "Where is she, Marcus?" I roared. "Where is she?" Marcus looked at the burning building, then back at me. He didn't say a word. He just held out his hand. In his palm was a charred, twisted piece of metal. Maya's engagement ring. I felt the world go silent. The noise of the sirens, the roar of the fire, the shouting of the crowd, it all vanished into a vacuum of cold, absolute darkness. The consequences had been paid. The fallout was complete. And as I fell to my knees in the Swiss snow, holding the ruin of my promise, I realized that I had finally lost the only room that ever mattered. The enemy had struck. And this time, there was nothing left to buy. Next chapter. Chapter 34, Media Scandal.